Sounds True presents The Jewel Tree of Tibet, Session 6, with Robert Thurman.
So here we are at the final session under the Tibetan wish-granting gem tree. So we'll begin by opening our special environment, merging into selflessness, letting ourselves dissolve slightly, letting our whole environment, our whole world picture dissolve, arising on the top of the world at Lake Manasarovar, sitting on a grassy bluff with all beings around us looking at us, seeing the jewel tree growing out of the island in the lake before us, filling the sky and the heavens, glowing and glistening like a giant Christmas tree, wish-fulfilling gems, all our mentors from all the cultures, Buddha, Zoroaster, Isaiah, Moses, the goddess, whoever you put there as your main one, and all the heavenly host, radiating jewel light rays down to us, diamond, ruby, emerald, topaz, sapphire, filling up with light ourselves, radiating the light out around us to all the beings, filling each one with light and energy and hope and pleasure. Their gratitude coming back to us, our gratitude going back to the refuge tree. And once we're in this environment, we have our arpeggio, and merely say the name, and you will have the whole theme come to you. And if not, if it means nothing to you, then realize that's where you should be focusing as you carry on in your lifelong retreat. First offering, taking refuge, praising and saluting, confessing, repenting, rejoicing in the virtues of others, requesting the rain of Dharma to fall from the mentors, requesting them not to attain nirvana and go away, dedicating everything we do for Buddhahood, for the sake of all living beings, freedom from suffering. Then beginning the actual path of development, once firmly settled in the refuge tree field, preciousness of human embodiment endowed with liberty and opportunity, our human embodiment, anyone who hears this. Immediacy of death, infinite continuity of life, beginningless and endless, cause and effect of evolutionary actions, inevitable suffering of all egocentric life states in the samsara. These four leading to the mind of transcendent renunciation, the self-release, the self-appreciation, the basis of a new ethic, an evolutionary ethic, then turning our mind to the condition of all beings, our relation to them, facing all of them, developing total equality of outlook, equanimity, recognizing each and every one as our mother, remembering our mother's kindness, wishing to repay that mother's kindness, exchanging self and other, trading self-preoccupation away, adopting other preoccupation. Reflecting more deeply on the disadvantages of self-preoccupation. Thinking broadly over the advantages of other preoccupation. Universal love, the giving of all our happiness and pleasure to all beings, seeing them lovely in their happiness. Universal compassion, taking from them all their suffering, bringing it over to ourselves to convert it into bliss through understanding. Adopting the messianic resolution that we will be the one to help all of them and save them from their suffering. First freeing ourselves and then teaching them how to do themselves. And finally conceiving the spirit of enlightenment, of love and compassion to all beings, vowing to become a Buddha for the sake of all living beings. Moving to activate that mind by taking the vow of the Bodhisattva and determining, yes, I will become a Buddha for the sake of all living beings. Now having the second mind, a spirit of enlightenment, of love and compassion, added to the first mind of transcendent renunciation. Going then into the third level of the path, wisdom of reality, wisdom of selflessness, realizing there's personal self and objective self, implementing the 4 keys on the personal self. First, recognizing what is to be negated by selflessness, the solid gut feeling of self-presence, of absolute self-unity, independence, self-existence. Noticing how we hold that instinctively. 2, making the commitment to find it, to answer the challenge of selflessness, to find it or to give it up if we fail. 3, seeking it as a true unity, failing to find it, entering space like equipoise samadhi, returning to dream-like aftermath samadhi, looking for it as truly separate from the life systems, looking for it in that way, failing to find it, entering the space like equipoise samadhi, returning to the dream-like aftermath samadhi. Turning then to objective self and selflessness, noting the substantial essence, the thing in itself nature of all things that we perceive or imagine, appearing to us as if they exist objectively in their own independent way. Committing ourselves to look for that and verify it or abandon it. First looking at constructed things, tables and chairs and bodies and hands, failing to find them under analysis, letting them dissolve into space like equipoise samadhi, coming back to dream-like aftermath samadhi. Then finally looking at the uncreated things, space, nirvana itself, emptiness itself. Thinking we experience that as some vast emptiness, vast infinity. We seem to experience that when we're seeking the thing and we cannot find it, when it is merely the negation of the thing, the failure to find the thing we're looking for. When we look for it itself, where is nirvana? Where is space? We can't find anything. It seems to be empty of itself. Its being empty of itself makes it but a pure transparency and allows us to realize non-duality of the absolute and the relative, non-duality of emptiness and relativity, non-duality of our wisdom that is aware of everything's emptiness, and our compassion that is committed to everything's presence in a harmonious, happy, non-suffering way. Okay, we come out of the meditation. That was the summary of the path. We should have this now under our belt, so to speak. You can play these scales and practice them again and again. Even when you focus on a particular one, say it's basically on the precious human life endowed with liberty and opportunity, then it's good to do it within the context of the whole path and sort of run through the arpeggio, so to speak, and then come back and really practice that note. Because the different ones reinforce each other. It isn't that you do one and then you know karma, for example, like you do the cause and effect of karmic evolution, and now I know karma, I don't have to think about that. In fact, the way we know things when we first know them is not that deep usually. As people say, mere intellectual knowledge is mere intellectual knowledge. It won't necessarily become experiential right away. And you can think you understand something, haven't you noticed, where you think you've got it all settled and you understand it, and then the next day you're sort of confused, then you go through it again, or something happens, and then you have a much deeper experience of it. Then you really feel, now today I really understand it. Then you come back again, and then you know it again, then you really understand it. It seems to be an infinite depth of experiencing reality. Reality is infinite openness, infinite potential, infinite possibility. And therefore it's no wonder that we can go on and on. It becomes more and more amazing, more and more miraculous, more and more wondrous, the deeper and deeper we go. So now having the you can even memorize all the different points, so you can go 1, 2, 3, count through them. Be very helpful to you. The Asian traditions in general proceed by memorization because of their meditative element. Because to really understand something, whatever it is, it could be any subject, one has to meditate to ingrain that understanding in one's mind. So memorization is very useful, because if you just read something and you sort of understand it as you read it, but then you leave it in the book, then when you come to meditate, your mind just wanders here and there and you can't really go deeper. But if you memorize what you learned, the main points, when you come to meditate, then you have this framework and you can drill deeper at each of the main points, and then you can deepen your understanding. Similarly, to really drill deeper, you have to have more critical penetration. You can't just accept a surface of something. And that you can develop, which is another crucial part of the education, by debating, by arguing and discussing. Not just passively, like accepting this or that or the other, but seeing where you stand in relation to it, wielding the ideas, arguing with another, seeing where your own ideas are ill-founded, or even if well-founded, you don't really know how to explain that well-foundedness. You just sort of whimsically adopted it. Then you deepen your reasoning, you deepen your insight, and then that comes with you also into your inner meditation, where it helps you drill deeper, drill down, find the deeper level of understanding. And it is amazing. I'm almost 60 years of age, and finally now I'm kind of suspicious of what I think I understand, because I have had so many experiences of having thought I understood something really sharply, clearly. Oh yeah, I got that. Wow, eureka type thing. And then only to have a couple of years later understand it again in a way where I was embarrassed about the way I had previously understood it. And then again, the new one, which was, wow, eureka, now I've got it, again dissolved. And again, it seemed deeper later. And I was embarrassed that I had thought the other thing. And then again and again it goes like that. So we shouldn't be defensive and think that we have one thing we know, then we hold on to that and that'll never change. The deeper we live our knowledge, the more wonderful it is. We have the assurance of the enlightened beings that reality is goodness, that reality is freedom from suffering, that reality is bliss. So we should never fear to open more and more to reality, to cast aside more and more of our preconceptions and our biases, and open more and more to reality. There is a good thing in the idea of having faith in enlightenment, faith in evolutionary potential, faith in infinity in a way. Now, think back to our spirit of enlightenment and realize that the essence of it was our determination and vow to achieve perfect Buddhahood, conceived as the summit of evolution, not only of our wisdom and knowledge of the nature of reality, and therefore relief and joy and self-liberation, but also the full evolution of compassion, meaning not just the wish to save others from suffering, but the actual ability, the embodiments, the technology, the tools, the arts, whatever it is that is necessary to optimally save other beings from suffering, to give them the tools by which to come to their own understanding of reality, which is finally that which frees them from suffering. So remember, that was the point where we established the Bodhisattva mind. We established the Bodhi soul, the soul of enlightenment. Not yet full awareness of enlightenment, but the soul, the seed, the determination for enlightenment that changes all of our evolutionary experience subsequently. And then think about also the 10th step in producing that, the step just before, because all the other earlier steps, of course, are in that 11th step, the conception of the spirit of enlightenment. 10th step was that step of messianic resolution. I must do it all for everyone. A little bit of intensity of the madman who says, I can't wait. I won't accept that, well, some other Buddha is doing it some other way, you just don't know. Maybe logically that's wise, but emotionally and will-wise, we must do it ourselves, we feel. Remember, that feeling is still there. Then, as we progress as bodhisattvas from that resolution, and you don't have to be a high, holy person to be a bodhisattva. You don't have to be a Lama incarnation or something, or some sort of highly pedigreed person to be a bodhisattva. Advanced bodhisattvas may be even angelic, sort of celestial, almost divinities, like Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of perfect compassion, Tara, the bodhisattva who symbolizes the dynamic saving activity of all Buddhas. Those are all like celestial archangels, which we will become on the way to Buddhahood. Or actually, some of them are Buddhas pretending to be bodhisattvas to go out and be more active or something. But we can be a bodhisattva just with the deep vow and the deep determination to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, to focus all our evolutionary experience on that. As we progress as such a bodhisattva, it won't be long before we become impatient and intolerant of the suffering of others. The Bodhisattva, of course, is ready to be patient and enduring. The Bodhisattva is ready to practice generosity for 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes, ready to practice morality and sensitive interaction with others, ethical interaction with others for 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes, ready to practice tolerance and bear with the injuries of others and sacrifice the self, leave the victory to others for 3 incalculable aeons. Bodhisattva is ready to do all of that from their own perspective. Bodhisattva is in no rush. Once we have tasted the bliss of bringing others into that freedom with the spirit of enlightenment, of love and compassion, once we have loosened the grip of the solid, separated, alienated self that is the core of self-centeredness, then we are already happy in a way. Bodhisattva is always joyful, even in agony. They are always happy and cheerful under pressure, because they have sort of felt the essence of reality being freedom, even though they haven't fully experienced it. So Bodhisattvas can pretty much undergo whatever. But Bodhisattvas will never be patient or tolerant with the suffering of other beings. They basically can't stand to wait around the 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes that it takes to create for themselves the Buddha land, to create a world for all beings that is a Buddha world, where everything is openly the mirror wisdom. So when beings see anything, even a lump of dung, it reminds them of freedom and enlightenment. They're unwilling to wait these 3 incalculable aeons because of the plight of others, of their mothers. How can we stand while our mothers roast in hell, fight and kill each other? Now here the Buddhas teach almost kind of miraculous methodologies, which are known as Tantra. Tantra means continuity. And continuity means that even enlightenment has infinite continuity. Tantra is sort of the definitive system of arts, definitive methodology that arises when one finally abandons the notion of a separated state as one's inner nature and final destiny. The dualistic notion of nirvana or salvation or liberation, moksha, as being some state of annihilation is based on the fact that within oneself, the self-centered being feels that somewhere in there, so desperate to hide from being bothered by relationships, this absolute self-center, that self-center will find a place that will be the absolute self-center, where one can just be without being bothered by any other thing. All those visions of liberation of the ultimate as some sort of separated place, therefore, separate state that you can enter, are finally crushed. In Indian culture as a whole, about 1,000 years after Buddha's time, people really became embedded in interwovenness, in interrelativity, and sort of it became more normal and more commonsensical to see continuity. And at that time, the methodology the Buddhas had always used, which is the methodology of continuity, the Tantras, became more and more explicated, emerged as sort of separate discipline, emerged sort of as texts, although it had always been there. One of my great teachers, the late Tara Tuku, once said something that surpassed anything I have read in any of the wonderful books, although it was in total harmony with all of them. When someone asked him, what is Tantra? And he said, once you have demolished the world that is built on the foundation of ignorance, the world of samsara, the world of self-other conflict, once critical wisdom has demolished that world by demolishing its foundation, ignorance, then critical wisdom itself moves to build a world based on the foundation of wisdom. A world built on the foundation of wisdom then is a world shaped by wisdom to be an environment for all beings that will be their optimal opportunity for their own evolutionary development and perfection. A world which every lotus, every passing dragonfly, when its wings buzz, the teaching of selflessness emerges. The gurgling water says impermanence, suffering, selflessness, freedom. So everything in the world, the whole world itself is a teaching of liberation and freedom and enlightenment to beings. And that world is built of wisdom by enlightened beings. And the technology of the building of that is called Tantra. You know, in some levels of the teaching, people talk of enlightenment as if it were the end of life. No more rebirth for me. This is my last life, they will say. They mean that it's their last egocentrically imprisoned life. Self-preoccupation, enclosed life. Life of suffering, of self-struggling with the overwhelming other. It's the last one of those lives. And since one makes that statement to people who've only known that kind of life, it's sort of virtually the last life. To them, life is so unbearable when they go deep down in the quiet of the night, when they're not putting on a brave front for somebody, they're looking to escape. So if you tell them, well, sorry, even you're Buddha, you're going to have boundless, endless lives, infinite emanations, benefiting all other and interwoven with all other beings, this frightened type of being would be just terrified, because they would be thinking that, well, I'd be called a Buddha, but I'd have the same paranoid, horrible time I'm having now. So Tantra is the way of rebuilding the world of wisdom after you have demolished the world of ignorance. Therefore, Tantra is considered esoteric, secret. It's not considered esoteric or secret because Buddha was some sort of elitist and he didn't want to share this key teaching with people. He was happy to have them do some kind of secondary thing, not the real thing, and was keeping the real thing for himself and his pals. It's not the reason it is esoteric. It is esoteric because if people were not prepared, if the society was not prepared, they would be confused and they would do the wrong thing based on the teaching of the right thing, if you're ready. it's like if you have a bicycle and you try to do like a banking and this and that and gliding and drive your bike off a cliff, you'll crash and die. You have to have the right preparation. And this also is not a mystery. What is the right equipment to rebuild the world of wisdom? The right equipment is the mind of transcendent renunciation, first of all. The essence of developing that mind is recognizing the infinite continuity of life, and therefore appreciating your own human sense of that life, with the possibility of freedom, and therefore understanding that there's no escape, and that you're infinitely involved, and therefore recognizing that the only thing to do is the most innermost essential thing to do. So that's a prerequisite for Tantra. The mind of infinite compassion of the spirit of enlightenment is a prerequisite for Tantra. It's the necessary equipment. It's another wing. Why have compassion if other beings will sort of disappear when you are released? And that the presence of other beings is just an illusion. If you have such a dualistic view, why would you care to evolve a body, a Buddhahood? A body is only for the purpose of reaching out to others, to hold them, to caress them, to communicate with them. That's the only purpose of a body when you are enlightened. Only love and compassion would make you willing to undergo the heroic efforts involved in rebuilding a whole universe. If you didn't have the messianic resolution of the Bodhisattva, why would you want to rebuild the universe? Why would you even think it was possible to rebuild the universe? And finally, the essential prerequisite of Tantra is some degree of wisdom. Not necessarily perfect Buddhahood, but enough wisdom to know securely the emptiness and relativity of the self to some degree of depth, so that one's feeling of solid self, the gut feeling of solid self, which is our only enemy in the world, our slave driver, our master, even our destroyer. When it gets mad, it takes our body and throws it in an abyss if it feels like it. So one has first to have unseated and dethroned that master by understanding that no absolute thing can be experienced by any relative thing. Therefore, any sense of person that I have is relative only. Therefore, it is constructed. It is made up of experiences, and it is infinitely transformable and malleable. And therefore, if I feel myself this way or that way, this or that day, that's very, very changeable. And I'm open to that change, and I won't be stuck rigidly in any particular sense of self. So that's the third prerequisite for Tantra. The motivation is the spirit of enlightenment. That's the knowledge of infinite continuity, and the drive for freedom is the kind of the engine. And then the safeguard and the openness of self-transformation is the wisdom. So therefore, this path that we've taught, although it is the exoteric path, these are in fact the foundation pillars, the foundation tripod on which access to Tantra rests. So now Tantra arises from this impatience of the Bodhisattva. I want to become perfect Buddha sooner, even in this life if possible, or at least in a couple of lives, or at least in the between state after death. I want to become a Buddha because I can't leave my mothers in this predicament for longer than that. Buddhahood is not just a change of your mind, leaving your body as it was. So therefore the Bodhisattva has to develop the generosity and the morality and the patience and the effort and the concentration and the wisdom in many, many body after body. In one life, perhaps, for example, the Bodhisattva might do the transcendent giving and give their life for another. They live completely lightly within their body, realizing that the body is something that easy come, easy go. And so they're completely detached. And therefore it's like a bliss to make a gift, because of the pleasure the other gets who receives the gift. But the problem for the Bodhisattva without the methodology of Tantra is that you have to be born again, and you have to grow up, and you have to study, and then you have to make sure you get to be human, then you have to learn again, then maybe you'll make another great Bodhisattva deed. So you sort of make one evolutionary quantum leap per life. And therefore it takes millions and billions of lives to evolve into this extraordinary magical being that is a Buddha. So in Tantra, how does this accelerate? Tantra opens a doorway. First doorway of entering Tantra, of course, is the Guru, is the mentor, the person already who is an adept at that. And then the doorway of that is the anointment, the entry into the mandala, that is the sacred space, the sacred circle, the magical palace, the transformed universe. And then the practice begins, but the point of entering that, it's like the doorway. For example, you can have a dream at night in which you do a heroic act and you give your life for the sake of others, your beloved or your community. And you sacrifice yourself in some way, in some heroic self-overcoming in that dream. It's hard for you to in the dream, you're attached to yourself, and yet you give yourself in some way. But then you wake up, and actually you didn't die, you didn't lose yourself, but you went through the whole spiritual thing of giving yourself in a virtual reality of the dream without having to go through the whole clumsy, heavy process of dying and being reborn and so on. So Tantra opens the doorway to such a virtual reality. And you sort of open your imagination and you open your nervous system, your neural net, to the possibility of being this much vaster type of sensibility and type of being. And that is also why you have to have understood some degree of emptiness to do that even. If you didn't understand the malleability of the solid self, the insolidity, insubstantiality of the solid self, the openness, emptiness, and utter malleability of the relative self, how in fact we are imagining ourselves in the embodiment we now have, and how we can reimagine ourselves in another completely different world, you wouldn't have the available power of creativity, of visualization, of imagination, if you had not dissolved your routinized imaginative perceptual patterns that are stuck on your normal acculturation, stuck on your normal self-image, stuck on your normal, solidified, self-centered sense of self. So there's an instance where, for example, you can't even give away the secret of Tantra because people couldn't even understand what it would be, because they only think that they are real as they are with their body and their two legs and their two arms. Tantras also teach one how to lucidly dream, how to use the virtual subtle body in a dream, and to cultivate more merit, develop more experience, develop deeper knowledge in a dream. So this is sort of the area of Tantra. There are many kinds of Tantra. In the Buddhist tradition, there are considered to be 4 main types. Your ritual Tantra, and then inner ritual Tantra, then yogic Tantra, and then what is called unexcelled yogic Tantra. And the tantric mandalas, although they have the form of magnificent palaces and beautiful magical environments and alternative universes even, are actually worlds where you train and develop certain sensibilities within your neural net, basically. In the unexcelled yoga tantras, the particular place where you pay special attention to that is called the creation stage. You train like as an architect of worlds of enlightenment. You train as a genetic engineer of the embodiments of enlightenment. You experiment with and adopt different embodiments for yourself, like male might visualize themselves as female, female might visualize themselves as male. Either male or female might visualize themselves as male and female in union, both. Like two beings. They might visualize themselves as a whole community of 700 beings, being each one of the different beings. There are many different degrees of complexity and different degrees of sophistication and difficulty, but basically it all has to do with expanding the neural net in a certain special type of virtual environment. It's the most amazing, subtle, sort of spiritual psychoneurology that the world has ever seen, I think. Probably people, though, who know really well Hindu Tantra, who know Taoist Tantra, who know Kabbalah, Sufi Tantra, Christian mystical Tantra, like the many mansions of Saint Teresa, and the sort of union with the Christ that she experienced, or Hildegard of Bingen. These are all in the very, very same ballpark. Of course, in the process of practicing that creation stage type of practice, in those virtual realities, one rehearses the experience of death. The experience of death precisely defined as learning the exact process of unentwinement of soul and body, of how the subtle mind, the spiritual gene, as they say, is embedded deep in the central cells, the heart cells of the body, and how they originally embedded there at the time of conception, and how they, in normal death, they unravel and the physical connection unravels, and then the soul flies free of the body. And rehearsing that without actually dying. And in fact, to learn to see death not as a fearsome thing, not as an annihilation, but as a gateway into ever greater transformation, as a gateway into birth, the source wherein you can find freedom to shape yourself in such a way that you can interact with any being to mirror that being, its own potential, its own future development. Eventually, when you become a Buddha, then this is how you learn. This is the training ground of becoming a Buddha, so that you know exactly how to teach another being. And then you enter into what is called the perfection stage. By realizing deeply the meaning of emptiness, you realize that the shape of life, the forms of life that we live in, are basically created by mutual imagination. Not only God's imagination, but our mutual imaginations. We imagine ourselves, we imagine each other, and these intersections of the imagination of sentient beings are what shape reality. You discover that through knowledge of emptiness, voidness. Once everything is void, nothing does not exist. But the way in which things exist then are existing by being shaped by mind, is the bottom message. And then mind is channeled in shaping things, because it's not a single subjective mind, it's an intersubjective mind of many beings, and the intersubjective mind of many beings shapes the world through language, through the word. And then the word in its ultimate poetry is mantra, is sort of magical word that from which springs form and springs life and springs awareness. You learn all that through learning voidness, emptiness, selflessness. You free the imagination from being trapped in these substantialized categories that seem to be sort of things in themselves, and you develop, therefore, the full power of your creativity. Every single one of you is a Picasso, the Picasso of the Buddhas, capable of manifesting actual living cells into artistic creations, as is a Buddha's body in this vision of enlightenment. The body itself is a gesture of compassion, looking just in this and that way for this and that people or person or group of people to inspire them to achieve their own highest evolutionary perfection. Then you go into the perfection stage, and in the perfection stage, based on your restructuring of the neural net in that way, you become a yogin who actually navigates the neural net, and you go into sort of subtle bodies, what they call the magic body. You can like multiply your presence everywhere, sort of astral travel, different things. But you don't play with those things just for their own sake. You only do that for the purpose of cultivating more and more merit, more and more compassion, more and more skill in liberating art, so that you can build the world that will liberate all the beings who are your mothers who you worry about. All of this is used as the yoga of accelerating 3 incalculable aeons of evolutionary life experience into one single life, which then contains billions of lives in virtual reality. And at the very, very highest level, there are these teachings like the Great Perfection Teaching, the Great Seal Teaching, the Great Integration Teaching, where you are right at the boundary of ordinary individuality and Buddha universality, where you sort of realize the non-dual bliss, void, indivisible perfection of the universe and of all beings, at the same time where they're catching themselves in a vortex of suffering, although you see them as just bubbles of bliss. But you don't just selfishly look at the outside the bubble of bliss. You go inside the bubble with the being where they feel they're trapped in a prison of steel. And you figure out ways of how to crack open that prison and free them and help them free themselves. Finally, of course, you can't do it by force, because they themselves have to understand. You can lead someone to the teaching, you can reason through it for them, you can exemplify it for them, you can illustrate it for them, but you cannot understand it for them. They have to do that for themselves. So these are the ancient sciences of the Tantras. The arts and sciences of building the world of beauty, the world of evolutionary fulfillment for all beings, using all the energies of life, transforming anything that might have seemed negative previously, even negative passions, even fierce, frightful things, transforming all of that into various wisdoms of selfless, loving, compassionate benefit. It is the great treasure of Tibet. But the key point is that it is not anything different than the rest of the Buddha Dharma. Even in the way in which we meditate in our retreat, the wish-granting gem tree path, that we set up a context for ourselves by canceling the context of the ordinary, dark, confused world with our ordinary limitations and so forth. We bring up our vision of the wish-granting jewel tree. We bring up the vision of all our mentors and all the great mentors of beings throughout history, of all traditions, of all cultures, all civilizations. That is Tantra. That's creating a mandala within which we are capable of new understanding, rather than trying to meditate within our habitual mandala where we're always incapable, where we're always imperfect, where we never can get there. Once we have the mandala, of course, we might just be focusing on ourselves and we'd be just doing bare awareness, simple attention, simple mindfulness, working on observing the way the body is, doing breath yoga, meditating on whatever level we would be meditating on. We'd be thinking about the subliminal sense of that new context. That mandala is immensely empowering. And that is actually Tantra, although it's not esoteric, doesn't require a vow. It's just using those arts, surrounding ourselves with those arts, and being empowered by them to whatever degree we can be, depending on what stage of outlook we have. So this is Tantra.
This concludes part 1 of session 6 of the Jewel Tree of Tibet with Robert Thurman. Our program continues on the next CD. Sounds True presents The Jewel Tree of Tibet, Session 6, Part 2, with Robert Thurman.
In the case of Tibet, this wonderful thing they had developed, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is a set of instructions for anybody who comes to that moment in life that everybody does come to, that moment of death. And hopefully by being aware of the immediacy of death ahead of time, it will not be a big shock to them, and they will actually be prepared way ahead of time, so that that death will not be such a big deal for them. It'll be just a transition, a doorway, like the leaving a cocoon into a butterfly state. An opportunity, something joyful, a release. But not a release into some fantasized nothingness or some fantasized passive place where they're going to be just sitting in some heaven, but release into a new embodiment where they can develop even more. But it's not called the Book of the Dead in Tibetan Buddhism. It's called the Book of Natural Liberation through learning in the between state, Bardo Todrul. That is to say, you become naturally liberated when you learn about this nature of your own reality, when you learn about it in your subtle body-mind complex that you inhabit during the between state, in the after-death experience. What I call the between, the Bardo. And then someone asked me to translate it, and I did for various reasons. And that was an incredible revelation to spend time with it, to steep myself in it. I like to say that the main thing I learned from it is the opposite of the Western title, Book of the Dead. Because one of the main things I learned from that book is that there are no dead. No one is dead. And that was a big thing for me. Maybe other people know that already. Although I think other cultures promote the idea of there being dead people. For various reasons, in various ways. Human beings are afraid of the dead. There's like all kinds of horror movies about the dead, the ghosts. But the great message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that there are no dead people. Nobody has time to be dead. Death is just a doorway into further existence. Now, it can be frightening, of course, to go through a doorway, especially when you go through it, if you hurtle through with no control and you don't know what's on the other side of the door. That, of course, can be very frightening. When people are afraid of death, I think that's really what they're afraid of. They're afraid of letting go of the known and falling into an unknown that would be unpleasant without having any control. It's like death is a doorway. When you walk through a door, when are you in the door? It's like a line has no width. Similarly, a door, to be the exact boundary between one room and another, has no width. The threshold has a width. You stand on a wooden threshold that's 6 inches wide, but when is it you're in the door? When your toe just touches that threshold? When you're in the middle of the threshold? Where's the line that is the actual door that divides one room from another? It's arbitrary, right? In a way, the door doesn't exist. It has no width. So death is a line with no width between one life and the next one. It's when mind detaches from embodiment in this body and then moves into like a dream body called the between state body, a virtual reality body made of subtle energy and shaped according to how the mind is used to feeling itself embodied. If I was a human being, my out-of-body body, after the minute after I die, may have at first the shape of my former body approximately. Because that's how my mind is used to being embedded with having eyes and ears. Did you ever wonder why in dreams you seem to see, you seem to hear, occasionally you touch something? So you seem to have a body, limbs, and eyes and ears. But your mind in the dream is in some sort of virtual reality zone. It's in the brain or wherever it is, we don't know. But it's not in the body, operating it mechanically. It's in the neural net. And in the neural net, the mind is creating a virtual body, like the body that it's used to. And so death is nothing but that line. So therefore nobody stays dead. There's no dead people. My mother, my father, my grandfather, my friend who died, they're not sitting around being dead. They immediately went into new experiences. They immediately became embodied in new ways. Any of them who remained in a between state, virtual, subtle embodiment, which can happen sometimes if they were really terribly attached to the previous life, some special reason, although they say that they go through a kind of little death and a rebirth even in that between state. They sort of dissolve and re-arise again in a between state embodiment, a virtual reality embodiment, like having a series of dreams without ever awakening. But they can sort of be involved, they can have a ghost-like way of being connected with their previous material reality. It can happen. That's actually how a ghost, truly speaking, a ghost is defined in the Buddhist tradition. But even they are not dead. They're living in a ghostly existence. They're staying close to their previous form, but they're not dead. If you've been really very, very bad, if you have a very negative, fearful, paranoid, hostile mind, you might go into a very, very all-consuming negative state of experience. If you have a very good, open, generous, loving, luminous mind, you'll very soon go into an experience that's positive, that seems to you much more delightful than whatever you were having on earth. Everything is luminous and nice, and you don't feel any regret about having been on the middle level, rather grimy planet Earth. Although it is beautiful, on purpose it's kept in this non-celestial way to give us like more opportunity to practice compassion. The Tibetan Book of the Dead grew out of the Indian and Tibetan great adepts of the Tantra, learning carefully and empirically and experimentally the process of dying and being reborn and being in the dream and being awake, and sort of the subtlemost transitions between these phases of consciousness and phases of embodiment, developing the ability to maintain awareness through those transitions. And from that they then developed kind of manuals and guides. Like, for example, when you die, they say at first your earth element dissolves into your water element, which you experience as a feeling of kind of melting, and all the hardness in your system gets lost, and you kind of melt in a heap or in a puddle. You feel like that internally. And what you experience internally is a kind of hallucinatory, mirage-like experience, because the hard edges of your vision, the distinct edges of the things you are used to seeing, begin to melt, and they become like sort of hallucinatory, just like buzzing patterns, something like that. Fluid patterns. You sort of lose your ability to see, and you lose your connection to form. And then the next level, the water element dissolves into your fire element, the way they put it. And here you have an internal vision of kind of smoke, not with your eyes, but sort of you're in a realm where you feel like you are a realm of smoke. Instead of feeling liquid and melted, you begin to feel hot and agitated. But by this time, you already lost the feeling of your limbs. You lost the feeling of your senses. Your hearing is going, and you hear kind of roaring sounds like crackling of flames or roaring of floods in your ears. But you don't hear any external sound. Someone speaks to you, you don't hear. And then the fire element dissolves into the wind element. And when the fire element dissolves into the wind element, inner zone of your inner experience becomes like a field of shooting sparks, or sometimes said to be like fireflies flying in a vast cloud of fireflies, flittering or twittering, or sometimes I've seen it even said like raindrops gently falling on a smooth pond surface, creating interference patterns of ripples. You have a kind of vision like that. But because it's fire into wind, it's a little sparkier than the water one. So the sparky one is pretty good, or firefly one. And then the wind element dissolves into space. And with that you get the feeling of a sort of single candle flame, absolutely unflickering, sort of whitish, yellowish light, a little tinge of blue, perhaps like a flame of candle that's standing absolutely still, perhaps at the moment of guttering out. It's a moment of total stillness. And a candle flame, pure candle flame. It's internal, you don't see it with eyes. Eyes are not functioning at all. No motor energy is functioning at all by this time. Your body has all gone to sleep, like, when you sit in it comfortably, body goes to sleep, or a knee or your leg or your foot goes to sleep. Here, the body itself as a whole has tingled and gone past tingling, is completely numb. You have no sensation of being in it. Then they say you go into a stage known as luminance. You completely disconnect from coarse energy except for very subtle virtual energy, what they call wind or subtle wind, like neural energy. And you go into an inner state that feels like a vast space filled with moonlight, called luminance. Sort of like you're in a state of feeling like isolation, but vast space, peaceful and cool. And then you go into a state from there called radiance, which is like a vast sky full of sunlight. There's no sun or moon in these cases like as separate objects. The whole space is solid sunlight, sort of bright and intense and hot, energetic, sort of reddish orange. And then you go from that stage into a deeper stage called dark light, where everything is pitch black. But black is so black, it's like a shining black. And you first are aware of going into it. It almost feels like becoming nothing or going into nothing. And the untrained person will become totally unconscious in this state. Their own sense of subjectivity is pretty muted in the previous two. They just are that vast moon-like state. They just are that vast sun-like state. They don't feel like they are a person in it. Then the dark light state, they just lose consciousness. But a yogin can retain a very subtle awareness, indivisible from the unawareness at this point, and won't completely lose consciousness. And then the last state is a state known as the state of transparency. It has become popularly known already in America as the clear light. And that's okay too, if you understand clear as transparent. Unfortunately, I think many people understand clear as like vivid or bright. And they think of it as a white light, but that white light is the surface light at the surface level of the subtle body-mind. The moonlight, that's white. This one isn't white, it's said to be like gray. It's like between light and dark. It's truly like glass, like transparency. It has no brightness, it has no darkness. It's a kind of light that has no shadow. It's a kind of light that doesn't fall on an object. It's within the object as much as not in the object. It's true transparency. And that state of transparency is said to be the most subtle state of any mind, of any awareness. And it is the state of the deepest state of the Buddha mind. And it is actually what death is. And it is actually light in its deepest state. And it's transparent, though. It doesn't obstruct any of the other states. So it isn't separate from anything, actually. And yet it is very quiescent, very healing and powerful. It is both infinite and you experience it yourself. But unfortunately, the ordinary person, when we die, because our mind is so used to being in the traction of the sense organs contacting the sense objects, that it just immediately tries to create another form and a feeling of being a subject that is isolated from objects and has a sense of self-center and so on. So these vast stages of moonlight, sunlight, dark light, and clear light, just to sort of shoot through it, and then you're back in struggling for form, you see. So the untrained person, the undisciplined, the aware person forgets or doesn't even notice those states. But those are the best states to work with. Those are the states that the Tantric yogin in the mandala, in the subtle yogas of the Tantra, has learned to navigate and remain conscious in, and then to consciously build up a form of a pure image out of that state, and consciously arise in this and that form, coming back up through those 8 signs, coming from transparency to dark light, from dark light to sunlight, sunlight to moonlight, moonlight to candle flame to fireflies or sparks to smoke, smoke to hallucination, mirage, and mirage to solid perception of forms. Now in a dreamlike between-state body. So the yogin can do that, and the yogin can do that consciously. The non-yogin, when we normally die, as the Book of Natural Liberation or Book of the Dead tells us, we go back and forth in this sort of thing over 49 days through various kinds of vicissitudes. And unless we're at the very highest tantric stage, where we're using those subtle embodiments in the between state to attain Buddhahood, or unless we're at enough advanced stage where we can perceive the Buddhas who appear during that subtle time and would be willing to install us in their mandalas, in their different Buddha lands, to enter us into some sort of high tantric level of practice right away. If we can't do any of those, then at least what we want to do is we want to guide our soul, subtle body, mind, because the soul has a subtle body. Guide the subtle soul and body, mind into a positive rebirth, reincarnation, in a country where we would have the precious human embodiment endowed with liberty and opportunity, where the teachings of the Tantras and of the Sutras, of the path of renunciation and compassion and wisdom were taught, a family which would encourage us to study those teachings, an economy that would support us and sustain us while studying those teachings. This is what we would aim for, is such a rebirth. Then the Book of the Dead gives us many instructions of how to do that, and the beings who are left behind, who somehow can still communicate a little bit to us because we kind of hang around in the vicinity of our previous environment, of our previous embodiment. We're sort of available to them psychically, and so they can read instructions to us and do things for us. It has a great effect of solace and also teaching even to the living who have been left by the dead person. Gives them a lot of useful things to do, a yoga, a practice, both helping their dead departed and helping themselves come to a deeper understanding of the process. It's really a marvelous thing, this Book of the Dead. Now, there's one fascinating detail about the Book of the Dead that took me a long time. I didn't even realize it when I was writing it, and didn't mention it in my introduction and things while I was translating it. But afterwards, thinking about it, it's occurred to me sometime, there was one little mystery, which is that it is said that the Book of the Dead was written by Padmasambhava, the great Guru Rinpoche, the St. Patrick of Tibet, the one who really tamed the native deities of Tibet, the archetypes, the tribal ego archetypes of Tibet, and got them interested in the Dharma. And it is said he formulated the Indian yogi's knowledge about the death and rebirth process in the Indian sciences of the mind, inner sciences as they call them. He formulated that in a book in the 8th century in Tibet. But then he hid the book because he said it wouldn't be helpful for Tibetans for another 700 years or for another long period of time, and that someone would come and discover it later only. And then in the 14th century, Karmalingba, one of the great treasure discoverers of Tibet, was led by the angels, the mystic Dakinis, to the right place, and he found it inside a pillar in the Samye monastery that had been built in Guru Rinpoche's time. In a hollow pillar, he found this text, and then he brought it out and he published it and he wrote commentaries, and it became widely useful throughout Tibet from that time. I actually had a fight with the Library of Congress, who insist that the author of the book is Karmalingba, the 14th century guy, because they never would credit a tradition that somebody would have been so prescient that they would have written something down and not published it for 700 years. For all these publishing and perishing modern people who are desperately trying to publish something all the time, they couldn't conceive of such a degree of self-restraint, of such a clairvoyant awareness of the ability and quality of the audience. So as, oh, I'm writing this one for the market 700 years from now. It's a little beyond their thing. So I had a fight with the Library of Congress. I said, you put Karmalingba down as the author in your classifying of the earlier translations, and that's disrespectful to the original tradition. If they thought Karmalingba was the author, they would say he was the author. They put Padmasambhava as the author and Karmalingba as the discoverer. So why don't you get it straight? But they wouldn't change. Anyway, I put that down on my publication. Padmasambhava the author, Karmalingba the discoverer, and I was the translator. But then it bugged me, why 700 years if it's such a great thing? It was a great relief to me to discover that there are no dead people. I was delighted. It connected with something I came to understand, that Tibetans, the more modern ones particularly, have almost no interest in ancestors. They're not into ancestor worship at all, which is a big thing in China and a big thing in other cultures in Asia. Still quite big in India, a little less than China. China is the particular big ancestor worshipping people. The nomadic people are not too big on it, but they still do it. Turkic ones, Mongolian less. But Tibetans have almost no interest. Almost unique among people in that they don't care for their ancestors much. They care for spiritual ancestors like Buddha, Marpa, Milarepa, but blood ancestors they don't care. And then of course you realize why, because the sense of there being no dead people is embedded in the culture. Because like with the Book of the Dead, they know that the minute someone dies, they're no longer your uncle or your aunt or your grandpa. They immediately become a new being, and they go into a bunch of new experiences. And therefore, the people they meet in the street could well be their grandpa and grandma. So they diffuse that sense of relationship and kinship and familiarity that in the more tribal cultures get attached vertically up my ancestor. They diffuse that around to people and they feel more kin and more familiarity, and they can use an expression like, oh, my mother living beings. Because you're my ancestor, probably, type of thing. So if I want to be nice to my ancestor, I'd be nice to you, you see. It's actually a wonderful achievement, culturally speaking, on the part of the Tibetans. Then I think I realized the meaning, although there may be other dimensions that I'm not sure of, but I think I realized why it was. When Padmasambhava was there, Tibet was run by an emperor, a militaristic emperor. Although he was interested in Buddhism and he had a lot of intelligence, he was kind of an adept, a wise person, but yet he was, socially speaking, running a military empire. A very authoritarian social structure, coercive. Women were being kept in their place, type of thing. People were marching out, conquering China, conquering the Silk Route, conquering northern India, Nepal, Kashmir, parts of Bengal. It was like a fierce, ferocious, uncivilized country, sort of like America today, highly militarized. In such a militaristic country, people are not supposed to think about death that much. You know, when you think about death, as you noted from meditating on the immediacy of death, death is not something depressing. Death is liberating. If you're living each day as if it were your last, you're not going to follow orders of such and such a boss. You're going to smell the roses. You're going to get into your best meditation. You're going to go on retreat. You're not going to slave at the office, work in the factory, fight in the battle, plow the field if it's your last day on earth, even if you're well enough to do so. You're not. So if you live in the immediacy of death awareness, you're going to be insubordinate, individualistic, seeking some sort of freedom, liberation, bliss, being compassionate. You're not going to be easily coercible by authority. So therefore, the fact that Tibet became a country after 700 years of struggling with their own rigidities and confusions and racialisms, clanisms, violence, and so on, opened up to the degree that it became sort of normative that individuals would be released to seek their own highest transcendence, to be universally compassionate, to become profoundly and comprehensively wise. Then it would be possible for death to be published, so to speak, for death to become widely aware of. For example, in the new death and dying communities here in America, people becoming aware of it. No one has necessarily addressed this social element, which is by hiding death from people, they coerce them more to be more avid consumers and more avid producers, more avid obeyers, more obedient followers of the party lines, of the military lines, more avid taxpayers. Their delusion becomes exploitable into those social channels. I'll produce, and I'll get some benefit later. I'll consume, I'll get a benefit later. They don't think, oh, this is my last day on earth. Why should I produce, consume, fight for somebody else for some minor purpose? I have my highest evolutionary purpose of traveling now on into the new life in the best possible way. So people pretend Tibet was a feudal theocracy, and of course it was 1,000 years ago. But the proof that Tibet was one of the most free countries that history has perhaps ever seen, even though they didn't have the documents of democracy, formally speaking, is proven by the fact that they felt they could afford to let their people live in the full light of death all the time. Living in the light of death means you have to be living close to a sense of the meaningfulness of life, because you have no life to waste when you live in the light of death. You live at an intensity of demanding some sort of fulfillment, some sort of security, some sort of compassion from the universe sort of immediately when you live in the light of death. Therefore, for example, in Tibet, the national mantra, which maybe we will close by making our mantra, those of you who like to learn it, is the mantra of the perfection of each instant. It's the original expression of be here now. It hails and salutes the Lord of compassion, the Jesus Christ Messiah of the Buddhist popular tradition, Avalokiteshvara, Chenresik as the Tibetans call him, the one who looks down from heaven upon human beings with compassion and does not ignore their state of suffering and difficulty. And he is represented in many different forms, of course, but one of the most beautiful ones is where he has really 11 heads and 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes, with one eye in the palm of each hand. His arms symbolizing his power of compassion to reach into every atom, into every moment, into every life of every being, like a great king of Dharma, a king of reality, a king of compassion, helping everyone along the way to enlightenment, giving them 1,000 helping hands. And those 1,000, of course, are only symbolic of an infinite number of helping hands. And also that these helping hands are not just sort of egocentrically helping you the way he thinks you should be. They are sensitive by his seeing the way you are, because he has an eye in the palm of the hand. The ultimately sensitive piece of skin on a body is the eye, and therefore he sees exactly what you need and how you need to be helped. A wonderful icon of that Avalokiteshvara. And in one of his hands he holds a jewel, and that jewel is considered the symbol of compassion. We are here, have been having a retreat, which is the wish-granting gem tree retreat, a tree on which such gems grow, which is a special Indian and Tibetan vision. But the actual wish-fulfilling gem for everyone in everyone's life is their own heart of compassion and love. As you open up your heart of love and compassion, which wisdom concretely helps you pry open that clamshell of the solid self-gut feeling, I'm the one heart. And when you do open that, then you're happy. Then you can fulfill all your wishes. Then you not only fulfill the wishes of others, but your own wishes are fulfilled when you fulfill those wishes of others. And that is the real wish-fulfilling gem. So he holds in his hand a gem, which is the gem of universal love and compassion. And then he holds in another hand a white lotus, which is the symbol of wisdom. The white lotus, delicate and beautiful, growing from the mud and on the surface of the water, but untainted by the water. And this lotus of perfection, knowing the perfect freedom of all reality, and sort of beautifully embodying that in its delicate opening petals. He holds the lotus in one of his many hands. He holds the jewel in another. In some sense, the jewel and the lotus are indivisible. The jewel is in the lotus, a sort of integration symbol. This is the mantra when Tibetans repeat it, because they feel they're living in this immanent wish-granting gem tree refuge field. The whole society is taking place. The whole land of 1,000 million snowy peaks. The vast land, large as Western Europe, surrounded by snowy peaks like a sort of snow-peak lotus. They live in that land, and it resonates with the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. The Tibetans actually tend to drop the da of the pad and they go Padme Hum. Om Mani 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 Padme Hum. Tibetans recite that when they walk down the road. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. They recite that when they haul a backpack up Mount Everest, the Sherpa Tibetans, or some mountain climber. They recite that when they drive down the street, they have little wheels with a weight on the wheel with millions of Om Mani Padme Hum written in letters that they turn as they recite Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum under their breath. When they sew, as they put each stitch, they go Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. And they visualize that this great wheel is turning in the core of every atom, or perhaps somewhat like a wheel in front of them in the sky, any way you can do it, or it could be in your own heart. They visualize that there's this beautiful wheel, like a kind of carousel wheel, and on the surface of the wheel is written Om Mani Padme Hum, these 6 syllables. And as the wheel turns, the syllables enunciate and light rays flow from this wheel. And the light rays that flow out from the wheel, they flow down into the hells. And when they go to the cold hells, they become sun and sand and warmth and rain. And when they go to the hot hells, they become rain and ice and coolness. And when they go to the realms of hunger and thirst, they become food and drink and all delicious things to satisfy the thirst of them. And then these rays go to the animal realm and they become the light of intelligence, and the animals become sensitive to each other and they begin to talk to each other and so forth when they're struck by these light rays. And when they go to the human realm, they become the light of the Dharma, of the teaching of liberation and love and compassion. And when they go to the Titan realm, they become the light of rejoicing and the light of joy, and they teach the Titans not to feel jealous of the gods anymore, not to attack the heavens all the time, not to fight and rival and compete with each other all the time, but to feel content and to rejoice in the fortune of others and not feel envy. And when they go to the divine realm, they become the light of realistic awareness of impermanence, and they let the gods see the short-term nature of their existence in the heavens. Even 1 billion years is a moment at the end of it, and they recite impermanence, impermanence, impermanence to the gods. And so as you say Om Mani Padme Hum, these light rays stream from the multicolored jewel letters of the Om Mani Padme Hum, and they fill the whole universe with the compassion of Avalokiteshvara, the compassion of all the Buddhas, with everything that every being needs everywhere in the universe. And so as you're saying this, of course, your own moment and every cell and atom of your body are filled with that. And should you die at that moment, you would be simply one of the light rays within the wheel of Om Mani Padme Hum. You would be embraced by the gentle, loving, tender hands of Avalokiteshvara, and he would care for you and see to it you didn't go to any of those terrible negative places, and see to it that you didn't go to some terribly overly positive place where you might indulge yourself and goof off all the time, and sees to it that you're reborn in the human realm and that you come back again into a place where you can learn the path of transcendence and the path of compassion and the path of selfless wisdom, and then enter into the subtle realm of the tantras and evolve and accelerate your evolution to become a perfect Buddha in order to bring all beings into the bliss void, indivisible, wish-granting jewel tree refuge mandala. So with that in mind,